and greetings from Australia. My name is Ruth and I am an Australian immigration law practitioner here in Australia. Well, in today's video, I would like to share with you the 3 things you must do in order to migrate to Australia under the Skilled Migration Program. Now, please note that the information in this video is not to be treated as legal advice or migration advice because each case is different and we assess each case on a case-by-case basis. However, we know that the contents of this video will provide you with some guidance as to what you need to do in order to pursue skilled migration. So let's get started. So what are the 3 things you must do in order to get a skilled visa to Australia? Well, the first one is skills assessment. I like to call it skills test because your qualification and your work experience will be put to test. So what that means is before the Australian immigration can accept your application, you must have had your skills assessed to prove that whatever you've studied back home or your work experience are comparable to Australia's standard. And so the next question would be, well, who do I go to? Well, that depends. It really depends on your occupation because each occupation has a different assessing authority. For example, if you're an engineer, then the assessing authority is usually Engineers Australia. If you are in the IT or ICT sector, then the assessing authority is usually Australian Computer Society or ACS. If you are let's say a community worker, then the assessing authority is ACWA. If you're a nurse, then it's NMAC. If you're a lawyer, then it's the Law Society of the particular state. If you're a doctor, then it's the Medical Board of Australia. If you're a tradesperson like a mechanic, a carpenter, a panel beater, then potentially it could go through VET or Trades Recognition Australia. So it really depends on what your occupation is and what you would like to nominate to be skilled under. So I noticed in the past when consulting with our clients, some of our clients are fairly versatile. They probably have had 20 years of work experience in different sectors. So what I usually say is if you can narrow it down and look at the past 10 years, so the first question would be, what would be the occupation that you would say that you have got the most skill in the last 10 years? And generally, I would also prefer if the clients can have recent work experience within the last 5 years, because some assessing authority actually requires you to have recent work experience within the last 5 years. So with that, once you know your qualification, you'll be able to sort of choose and narrow down because Australia has so many different occupation lists. Now, some of you might have read through the website and you might have seen immigration's website with legislative instruments, and each of them has got a different, each visa has got a different list. So generally we have, the short-term list, we've got the medium to long-term list, we've got the regional list, etc. And then the state government they refer to different lists. So depending on which visa you're going for, it is important that you know which occupation list your nominated occupation is under. And then from there, make a decision and say, okay, this is the occupation I want to nominate. And then you would go ahead with submitting a skills assessment application. In terms of that, the skills assessing authority usually require you to have qualification and work experience. Now, in some cases, you will be able to substitute ample amount of work experience. For example, if you haven't got a qualification, you can actually use say 10 years worth of work experience to substitute for a formal qualification. But that would really depend on the type of occupation. I do know that VETA says for professional occupations will require clients to have at least a bachelor's degree. Some cases they would say, well, a diploma is sufficient, but you have to have, more work experience. So it really depends on the assessing authority, and it's always good to find out what the requirements are before you make the application. Skills assessing authority in Australia are also quite strict in a sense that if you wish to submit that you have worked in a particular company back in your home country or outside Australia, it is so important to show proof that you were getting paid work. So usually voluntary work may not be sufficient, depending on the experience. In some cases it may, but it has to be paid work. And so, and I understand, in some countries, when you go to work, you get paid cash. But you see, getting paid in cash can be an issue because you can't really prove that you were paid for the job. So I would say to my clients, if possible, talk to your employer and ask them to pay you into your bank account. Make sure you've got a pay slip, make sure you pay your taxes, and just do everything right, because Australia has high standards, and our government do require applicants to show proof for any work experience claimed. So that's very, very important. And the Skills Assessing Authority will require evidence of that. And also, in regard to work references, these are very important, especially if you say that you are, let's say, a degree holder for X occupation, and you've worked in X company for 5 years, then the assessing authority will also require you to provide a reference letter. And one thing I noticed in the past, where clients try and apply themselves to the Skills Assessing Authority, they may not have met the reference letter requirement. For example, it is, just a simple letter to say, oh, so-and-so worked here, and that's it. So that's usually not sufficient. So you want to actually compare to what the government is looking for, or what the assessing authority is looking for, and then see what you have, the tasks that you've performed, and list out a minimum, I would say, 7 to 8 different job descriptions to say that you've worked in, whether it's managing your clients or, doing XYZ. So it's so important to actually list the job description, because if you are unable to prove that, then the application can be refused, and that would be a waste of time and money. If you need help with skills assessment, just let us know. This is something that we can assist our client. There is a contact email below, or you can visit our website, and we'll be happy to assist. So that is in regard to skills assessment, and also, in terms of your qualification, they usually require your transcript. So, just having a certificate to say, oh, I'm a graduate of this degree, that's not sufficient. So you have to provide a transcript. So you have to dig your records from maybe 10, 20 years ago, or if you haven't got it, contact the university or college and provide the documents that they require. Because if you pass the skills assessment, then you can move on to the next step of your visa. If you don't, then you can't move on. That would mean you might have to think of another visa option or think of another occupation to be assessed under. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing you must do for skilled migration is English test. Now, in some cases, you may be exempted from undergoing an English test, and that's if you hold a passport from a certain country, such as New Zealand, USA, the UK, Ireland, Canada, because it's an English-speaking country, so the Department of Home Affairs expect, that you can meet the English requirement. However, if you are a passport holder of any other country that we have just mentioned, then you must do English tests. So the results are usually valid for 3 years. Even with skills assessment now, in most cases, it's valid for 3 years, which is great, because if you do it now, and you're not ready to migrate just yet, at least you know that it's valid for the next 3 years. But yes, coming back to the English test. So previously, when I initially migrated to Australia, it was very limited in a sense that you only have the option to sit for, let's say, an IELTS test. But right now, immigration accepts, I think, about 5 or 6 different tests now. So it's a lot broader. And so my advice is that check out all the different tests, see which one suits your personality best, see which one you can perform best. But the acceptable ones are IELTS, which is IELTS, there's OET, there's PTE, there's TOEFL. So a whole heap of different English tests, but usually you'll be tested on the 4 components, and they are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Depending on the points, which we'll go into later, generally you have to meet a minimum of competent score for each of the 4 categories. So for example, if you met competent, but one of those elements you haven't met competency, then you have to resit the test again. So it's really important that you are strong, not just in speaking and listening, but also that you practice writing tests, you practice speaking to somebody, you practice reading. So usually there are materials out there, online courses that you can take, and some of them are fairly affordable, and it would be my utmost recommendation that you prepare yourself before the test, because if you don't and you do not meet the score that you desire, then you have to resit for the test. And that's fine, you can resit for 10 tests if you like, but every time you resit for a test, you'll be spending money. So it's always better to just prepare. It's all about the preparation. You know, sometimes I feel that English tests may not necessarily judge your English ability, but more so it's about learning the technique to pass the test. I actually have, this is a few years ago now, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago, I was speaking to one of my colleagues, and he was actually born and raised in Australia, and we were working in a similar industry, which just really good friends. And he said, you know, he's heard a lot about English tests. So one day he decided to go and sit for the English test, but he didn't prepare for it. He just went straight into it and he sat for it, and he failed the test. And so we had a conversation, you know, that's why it's so important that you prepare for the test. It's just like going for a driving test before you get your license, you know. You want to prepare. You want to have a tutor to show you, okay, what must I do when I first get into the car? Do I adjust the mirror? Do I adjust my seat? You know, how do I turn on the indicator and not just, you know, turn right when I want to? Do I have to stop at the stop sign, etc.? So it will pay off, put it this way. So definitely do practice tests before you go for your English test. Some clients would ask me, they'll say, well, which one is the best? Which one is easier? Well, because when I did my English test, this was years ago, I did IELTS because that was the acceptable test. But right now, there are all these other tests available and recognized by the Australian immigration. I have noticed that I would say probably more than 50% of my clients have gone for, let's say, a particular test, right? I'm not going to mention the name, but then they go and sit for another test, like PTE, for example, and they're getting like higher scores. Now, having said that, not all of them, some clients would go for, let's say, IELTS, they get a lower score, they go for PTE and they get a higher score. But some clients would go for PTE and they get a lower score. But when they go for IELTS, they get a higher score. So I would say, you know, test out to see which one you can score better and then just pick that one. However, it is also important to note that some skills assessing authority, so again, we're going back to the first point, skills assessment, some of them will need you to go for an English test before you can apply for a skills assessment. So for example, engineers, teachers, social workers, so certain occupations will require you to have an English test, and they will actually tell you as to what the type of English test that you require before you can go for the skills assessment. So my recommendation is that before you choose your English test, check with the assessing authority to see which English test they require, and just do what they ask you to do, because that way you're not wasting your time. Okay, so English tests, very, very important. And finally, the third thing you must do to obtain a skilled visa is you must meet the points test requirement. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, and I've done another video explaining the expression of interest process. I'll try and go through that a little bit today as well towards the end of the video. But generally, you must meet a minimum of 65 points to be eligible to submit an expression of interest for a particular visa. Now, there are different types of skilled visas. Depending on your occupation, certain types of occupation will cause you to be eligible to apply for like the skilled independent visa, for example. But certain types of occupation will require to have like a state sponsorship or territory sponsorship type of visa. So that's important, and I've covered that in one of my other videos, so you can check that out. But in terms of points tests, 65 points is minimum for you to lodge an expression of interest. So points are allocated for the different factors such as your age. So at this point, the cutoff age for skilled migration is 45. And therefore, if you're looking to migrate to Australia, if you're still in your 20s or early 30s, now is a good time to pursue, because the older you get, so 40 is not old, it's very young, but in the eyes of immigration, the older you get, the fewer points you can claim. So at this point, if you're under 25, you get about 25 points. If you're 25 to 32, you get 30 points maximum, so that's the prime. And then if you're anywhere between 33 to 39, that's 25 points. And once you hit 40, it goes down to 15 points. And that's why it's so important to pursue it while you can, while you still have the energy to do it. Points are also allocated for qualification, depending on what qualifications you might have. Usually a bachelor's degree or master's degree will give you 15 points. PhD will give you 20 points. If it's a diploma or trade qualification that is recognized in Australia, then potentially 10 points. If you have qualification in specific sectors such as science, engineering, etc., in certain situations you can get an additional 5 points. In terms of work experience, you can also claim points if you work outside Australia and or inside Australia, and usually it's claimable for the last 10 years. So usually if you've worked in Australia, you can get points, quicker points I call it. For example, if you worked in Australia for 1 year only, potentially you can get 5 points. But overseas, if you work 1 year, you get 0 points. So you have to work 3 years overseas before you can get 5 points. Okay, and the laws around this can be a little bit complicated, because at times you can only claim points after you're deemed skilled, etc. So before you apply, just make sure you chat with someone like an immigration lawyer or a migration agent to determine where your point's sitting. If you need help, just let us know. Points are also claimable if you studied in Australia and if you studied in a regional city, a town in Australia, but you have to have met the minimum requirement, and they call it an Australian study requirement. So usually it's about 2 years. You must have completed or studied in Australia. Points are also allocated for English tests. So the minimum requirement is competent English, but for that you will get 0 points, okay? And so for our clients who are exempted from it. So, for example, if they hold a US or UK passport, we would usually advise them to just go ahead and sit for an English test, because you can easily gain 10 or 20 points. And that's going to boost you up on your ranking when you go forward with the expression of interest process. Now, points may also be allocated if you're single as in you don't have a spouse or a de facto partner. And it's 10 points, which is fantastic, because this was not available back then when we applied for it. So this is a new thing. And if you have a partner and your partner meets competent English, then they can donate 5 points to you. And if they meet skills tests, they can donate additional points as well. If you speak in another language and you are a qualified translator or interpreter, potentially you get another 5 points. But with that one, you have to sit for a test and you have to be recognized by an Australian translator. So at this point, the translating authority is NAATI. It spells N-A-A-T-I. I repeat, N-A-A-T-I. So you can actually contact them and just check out their website and see if you can easily sit for a test and get another 5 points. Now, why are the points so important? It is so important because it is a very competitive process. You're essentially competing with people who are already in Australia, or if you're in Australia, you're competing with people who are overseas who might have 10 years of work experience and amazing English. So generally, even if you have sufficient points, 65 points, you may or may not get an invitation to apply. And the reason why I'm saying that is because unlike the other visas, whereby once you've met the requirement, you can go ahead and lodge an application for the specific visa. With this one, with the skilled migration, it's different. You have to go through an expression of interest process to say that, hey, I'm really interested to apply for this visa, pick me. But the issue is that if you're sitting at a lower point level and someone else has got 100 points or 90 points, then potentially they will get invited to apply first. And once the quota is met, it's closed, which means you then have to wait for the next round and the next round. So we've seen, applicants, waited for 2 years and they still haven't got any invitation to apply. And so if that's the case, then you need to really think about, okay, how can I boost my points? Can I look into state sponsorship? Because the states or territories, depending on your occupation, may also give you another 15 points, in some cases 5 points if it's for permanent visa, 15 points if it's for a 5-year temporary visa. So each of the state and territory have a different requirement, and if you need help with boosting your points, just let us know. We will provide an email address, or you can just contact us on our website by submitting a form, or we might want to look further and say, hey, is there another visa option? Can I come maybe on a work visa option? Which might be a little bit easier and takes the stress off of you. So to summarize, the 3 things you must do for Australian migration are, number 1, skills assessment. It's so important because without that, you cannot apply for your visa. Number 2, English tests, unless you're exempted. Number 3, you must meet the points test with a minimum of 65 points, but the higher the better, in order for you to get an invitation to apply for the visa. So I hope that the contents of this video is helpful to you. And again, please do not treat the contents of this video as legal or migration advice, because each case is different. If you need specific advice for your case, please contact us on the email address below, or submit the form through our website, and we would be very happy to assist you. We want to wish you the very best for taking the time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and wishing you the very best in your pursuit for Australian migration.